All right, well, it is the top of the hour, so let's get started. I want to welcome you to this tutorial about storytelling, and let me tell you why I decided to do this. I was talking with some of my private coaching clients. They do a lot of presentations for doctors, and they had a huge opportunity to get in front of like literally hundreds of employed doctors. And they wanted to know, how do they organize their talk? And they had wanted to talk all about their systems, of which they were very proud. And I said, you know what? How about if we just make this a storytelling session? And so they told the stories of how and why they got involved with financial services, of how and why they're working with doctors. And then they told hopeful stories of transformation of doctors before and after they had been involved. And it felt like a leap of faith because previously their stories had pretty much been about financial literacy. Like they wanted to impart the lessons that they had learned over time. And so it felt like they were taking a big risk. But they did it. And what they discovered was that they had gotten a better response, more appointments on the books than with any of their other presentations. So we are going to be talking about storytelling today, and I'd like to address basically three questions. Number one, why tell stories? Second, when do you tell stories? And third, what are some tricks to tell stories well? Okay, well, we're in business. We want to help you get business results. So why in the world tell stories? The short answer is that stories work. If you think of the three polysyllabic words that kids speak, it's mommy, daddy, story. Our brains are wired to learn through stories. We have an intense curiosity about stories. So no matter what market you are in, I hope that you will start to include more stories. But there is a specific reason to tell more stories when you work with doctors. And here it is. Anatomically and functionally, our brains are divided into three parts. There's the thinking brain, which is the dark lavender on the outside. There is the feeling brain, which is in the center. And then there is the reptile brain. So think of these three areas of the brain as three stories in the house. There's the upstairs, your thinking brain. And we would like to believe that most people make logical, informed investing choices with their thinking brain. But what we know from both our experience and the research of Nobel laureates is that most people make their money choices with their feeling brain, or now more than ever, their reptile brain. So think of the feeling brain as sort of the main story in the house and the reptile brain in the basement. Okay, so when people are really, really worried about their finances, it feels like life and death, they are in their reptile brain. All right, the thing that separates most doctors from most business people is that when we doctors make choices about money, we normally make it from our feeling brain. You, as the financial advisor, have the discipline to go into the upper story, into your thinking brain to make choices. I mean, one financial advisor told me the main thing I do is I protect doctors from themselves. All right, so if you're going to connect with a doctor prospect, or maybe you've got a doctor client who is experiencing some concern, they are going to be in either their feeling brain or their reptile brain. The language of the thinking brain, the upstairs layer, are words and numbers. The language of the feeling brain are stories or pictures. Now, let's say you're in your house, you're in the kitchen on the main floor, and you want to talk to your partner who's upstairs in the bedroom. You could certainly shout out, But the best way to do it is to physically take yourself up to where your partner is so that you are most likely to be heard. Well, if you want to engage doctors, you want to go where they are. You want to assume that they are in their feeling brain. And since the language of the feeling brain are stories or numbers, that is the best way to engage them. So emotion drives motion. If you really want to connect with somebody and inspire them to take action, tell stories that elicit emotion. So storytelling works. This isn't just a wild woo-woo thing. I've been helping financial advisors acquire doctor clients for a decade now. And again, I see the power of storytelling. Okay, so when and why do you want to tell stories? Well, I'd like to share 5 specific situations in which stories can help you. Okay, so number 1 is you tell stories to be heard. You know, I've heard that today we're in an attention economy. You know, the challenge of getting somebody's attention is really, really difficult. And, you know, one of the biggest questions I hear is, you know, how do I get in front of doctors? How do I get their attention? And a great story is a great tool to have. So, you know, this question, do you have time for a quick story? Well, everyone has time for a quick story. So if you engage a doctor neighbor, or if you are at a meeting, or you are golfing with a doctor, you always have time for a quick story. And these stories can be very compelling. So let me just tell you a story from my life about how telling a quick story led to a pretty significant business outcome. So when my son was in grade school, there was another really, really well-liked kid who unfortunately was diagnosed with a lymphoma. And it was a bad lymphoma. And he had gone through a round of treatment, and it looked as though the cancer were in remission. But a couple months after that, this boy had a seizure, and he was diagnosed with cancer that had come back. And at that point, the doctors really didn't have anything that they could do. So they spent a while like looking for options, and all along, you know, the boy is saying, well, what about my bar mitzvah? What about my bar mitzvah? Because he was 12 years old. And finally, the parents really heard that, and they decided to move forward with the bar mitzvah. You know, as the day was getting closer and closer, it became really clear that this boy was not going to make it. And so they moved up the date of the bar mitzvah. Unfortunately, the boy died just days afterward. And before I went to the funeral, you know, I wanted to know more about what happened. And so I found this really remarkable video on YouTube of the actual bar mitzvah. I mean, here is this boy. He doesn't even have the strength to get his head off the bed anymore. But the room is filled with joy and laughter. And what I had known was that the hospice workers had really intervened and supported the family in moving forward with the bar mitzvah and being able to find joy in this horrendous situation. And I was so moved by that, by the power of hospice, that I actually picked up the phone and called the executive director of the National Hospice and Palliative Care Association. I got his secretary and I said, look, I've got a story I'd really like to tell the executive director. Do you think he has time for a quick story? And sure enough, he did. I called to tell him, you know, this is the kind of thing that hospice does, and what can I do to support your success? And he actually invited me to deliver a keynote address at their national meeting. So this story just opened huge business doors. And telling your stories, especially stories of hope and optimism and transformation, the story of a doctor who had the best year ever in 2020, can similarly catch people's attention and open doors. Okay, the second reason to tell stories is to build rapport. So you already know that people want to work with people they know, like, and trust. And now neuroscience helps us understand why. Our cells are wired. Our brains are wired with a special cell called a mirror neuron. So the statement, I like you, really means I'm like you. I see part of myself reflected in you. And the reality is that what you do mirrors what doctors do. I mean, so what do? You optimize financial health. You look into the future and try to make the best predictions in the face of an uncertain future. And the stakes are really, really high. So what you do mirrors what doctors do. So you've got an automatic way of triggering these mirror neurons if you tell the right stories in the right way. Probably the most important story that you will ever know or tell is your signature story. This is the story of why you are in financial services and why you are working with doctors. And so let me just share some signature stories. You know, one was from one of my financial advisors who was the son of a surgeon. His father outlived his money. And now this man dedicates himself to making sure that other doctors are not in the situation that his father was in. So that's a really compelling story, right? Every doctor can see themselves with this core fear of outliving their money. Another man was actually in the pharmaceutical industry. He had, sold drugs to doctors, and then he decided, you know what? I see some of the challenges of doctors. I see that doctors are really having a hard time with money. And so he decided to shift and was now a financial advisor. But then he was diagnosed with colon cancer. He was a 33-year-old man with 2 young children. And he was looking at the possibility that his children would grow up without a father. And he was so grateful to the doctors, the colorectal surgeon, the oncologist, all of these people that would allow him to do what he wanted to do in life, that he switched. He had been working with business owners, but now he had decided that he was going to give back to these doctors who gave him his life. And he told this particular story. Another financial advisor came into me. He was actually interested in taking the Cracking the Physician Code course. He actually did mortgages. He wanted to sell more mortgages to more doctors. And he was trying to decide, should I buy this? Should I sell this? And I sat down with him to learn about his signature story. Like, what was his real story? And he told me a pretty dramatic story. His daughter had been in a car accident as a teenager, and she was hit by a drunk driver, and she was in a vegetative state. And the doctors had told her that, she might not make it, but even if she did, she might never wake up. And even if she did wake up, she probably would never be able to walk or talk or engage in the world. Well, guess what? She woke up. And she learned how to walk, and she learned how to talk. And with help, she was just on the verge of graduating from college. And I said, wow, that is a tremendous story. Have you gone back and let all of the doctors and nurses and physical therapists who have been involved in their care know what has happened? And he said, I never really even thought of that. And I said, well, listen, how about if you just go back and tell all of the people involved in her care that she's about to graduate from college, or maybe wait until there's a picture of her in her cap and gown, and then send her a thank you note. And that book that we're working on, how about if you include the thank you note in a copy of this book? And write a handwritten note in the book saying, look, thank you for all of the work that you have done. I'm helping doctors with mortgages right now. If you're ever buying or selling a house, contact me. It would be a real honor to make a difference in your life that's just a little bit like the difference that you made in our life. So he hadn't even thought of that, but I think that you can see the power of a story. And some of you on the line have actually made an investment in creating custom versions of my book, either The Myth of the Rich Doctor and The 9 Money Mistakes that doctors make. And if you've gone through this process together, one thing that is the first thing that we did was we found your signature story and then crafted that into a foreword. And why? It's because stories work. So what is your story? What is the story of how and why you came into financial services? Maybe it's your own hero story. Maybe it's that, you grew up in relative poverty. You saw the chaos that financial scarcity caused in the lives of your parents, and you vowed that you would never be in that situation. So you transformed your own life. Maybe your story is that you're just really good at money. You started out with a paper route, and you saved up enough money that you put yourself through college. Own that. What doctor wouldn't want to work with somebody like that? So this story can sometimes require a little digging. Sometimes it requires a little mining. And this is one of my gifts of finding this signature story. But then once you mine this gem, you want to craft it. You want to polish it. And this doesn't happen just by accident. You want to do this with intention. And then once you've got your signature story, you want to have different versions of this. You want to have the 30-second version of it. You want to have the 1-minute version. You want to have the 5-minute version. And then you pull out this story, the right version of the story for the right time. I think what this means is maybe getting in front of a video camera and telling this story on the About Us section of either your homepage or the About Us tab. Maybe it means going on your Facebook business page and telling this story, or uploading this signature story on your LinkedIn profile. Stories are really amazing, and I just cannot overstate the value of telling this story once you've gotten it. Okay. The next thing that you can do is make a presentation pop. I told you the story of my clients who really got breakthrough results when they told more stories. Now, I've had the great honor of being on radio. There was a time when I had an opportunity to be on national TV. So what did I do? I hired a media coach. And basically, this media coach turned me into a better storyteller. And so I wanted to make a point in this program. And so he drew out a story from me. It's a story that you might have heard me tell before. It's the story of my son. When he was a toddler, he had this love affair with trucks, especially construction trucks. I used to let him climb on construction trucks. And one day we came across a really, really big construction site, and he wanted to climb on the trucks. But I pointed out the fence all around the construction site, and I pointed to the sign on the locked gate. It said, "Do not enter." And he thought for a moment, and he said, "Take down sign." And then what I said, my point of the story is, this is what I do. I take down the "do not enter" sign so that people can go where they want to go and do what they want to do. Okay, so this was really sort of about Hollywood, right? About having like a big media exposure. But guess what? Today, when you're connecting, especially virtually on Zoom, you are now competing with Hollywood. So doesn't it seem logical to pick up some tricks from what Hollywood knows and does? And as Alfred Hitchcock say, a movie is like life with the dull parts taken out. So if you really want to engage people, and remember, if you are doing a webinar on Zoom, there are lots of things that the doctors who you hope to invite will do. If you really want to do it, tell these great stories that really make things pop. So you want to fill your presentations with appropriate stories. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to be the heroes of our stories, right? But for doctors, the most compelling stories will make the doctor the hero. So the most influential person in a doctor's life is another doctor. But if you can tell the story about how you facilitated the transformation, these stories will all reflect well on you. Okay, the fourth thing that you can use stories for are to overcome objections. So if you think about your doctor prospects and clients, you know, what keeps them from reaching out to a professional financial advisor? Because you know only half of doctors are working with professional financial advisors. Well, I think a big thing that keeps doctors from doing that is embarrassment, shame, and regrets. You know, they invested their kids' college savings into a dumb doctor deal that went south. They made a really stupid financial choice. They know that they should have done better. So just owning the reality. It's kind of like dieting, stepping on that scale for the first time. I mean, that can keep people from moving forward. Well, if you already know this, then how about if you tell the stories of doctors who have invested in dumb doctor deals, that they have done things that they should have known better, and how you facilitated that transformation. So now a doctor knows that they are not alone. They're not the only person who has done that. Remember, doctors are competitive. They want to know how they stand with respect to other people. And if you can just normalize some of this embarrassing behavior, it makes it a little more comfortable for them to move forward. Okay, the fifth way that you can use stories is to inspire a doctor to take action. So think about makeovers. I mean, think about, you know, when you actually see these before and after pictures, it really makes things pop. And if other people can do it, especially if you have lots and lots of doctors who have made this transformation. That gives your doctor prospect or even client more faith that this can happen for me too. So I know that that there are boundaries around testimonials, but if you can get lots of doctors to tell their stories, not necessarily your stories, but their stories in their own voice, that is really going to make it easier for other doctors to say yes to you. You too can tell story after story about doctor transformations. You can tell doctor disaster stories. Here's the story of a doctor who, really thought that this was a great investment, invested in real estate, and then wound up in a complete disaster. Or you can tell another story about a doctor who was working with a CPA, thought he was doing everything possible to legally and ethically minimize his taxes. Yet, a tax strategist on the team saved this doctor over $900,000 in taxes in a single year with completely legal and ethical means. Well, imagine the power of that story. And by the way, that is a real story. I'm just going to look at the attending list to see if the person who actually did that is here. But, these are dramatic stories that can make huge, huge differences. And it makes it more real and more possible. Okay, so next, what are some tips to really tell stories well? All right, well, just know that storytelling is an art. And the more that you do it, the better that you are going to get. So I am always becoming a better storyteller. So how can you do it? Well, first, you can listen to great storytellers. So I personally love the Moth Radio Hour. You can just hear these storytellers and think, oh, here's something that they did that I might want to do with my stories too. TED Talks are great stories to listen to. So you can even get a list of the talks about money. So watch those talks. Listen to what they are doing. Great storytellers will paint word pictures. So if doctors can see it in their mind, they can remember it and believe it. So think about sort of being the Bob Ross of storytellers. And, engage the senses. So I don't know if you caught Oprah Winfrey's presentation when she won the Cecil B. DeMille Award. But let's just talk about, let's just read her words that she said and just listen to this, because this is brilliant storytelling. In 1964, I was a little girl sitting on the linoleum floor of my mother's house in Milwaukee, watching Anne Bancroft present the Oscar for Best Actor at the 36th Academy Awards. She opened the envelope and said 5 words that literally made history. The winner is Sidney Poitier. Up to the screen came the most elegant man I had ever seen. I remember his tie was white, and of course his skin was black. And I had never seen a black man being celebrated like that. I cried many, many times to explain what a moment like that means to a little girl, a kid watching from the cheap seats as my mother came through the door, bone tired from cleaning other people's houses. But all I can do is quote and say the explanation in Sidney's performance in Lilies of the Field. Amen, 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 amen. So do you see how there are these little details and senses that you could see, you could feel, that really made this story alive? So as you tell stories, even if you're doing it in a presentation, even if you're doing it on a website, Speak to one person. Imagine that you're telling a story to a single person. That will humanize things and make it more real. Next, don't let the great stories slip away. When I hear a great story, I literally write it down on a 3x5 card, and then I have, this whole recipe box filled with these great stories. So for example, I remember reading the newspaper, and it told the story of this man who had been pulled over for some kind of minor traffic infringement, turning without changing lanes. So the policeman took his registration and his driver's license and came back and said, "Sir, there's a warrant out for your arrest." And he pulled out his pocket and pulled out a get out of jail free card and handed it to the officer. Well, great story, brilliant, right? And this story can be used in all sorts of different ways to illustrate this point that, there's always some options. So unfortunately, the guy did wind up going to jail. I mean, this story didn't work, but it's really a charming story. So if you're out and about, if you hear stories, collect them and tell them, especially that make people smile and laugh. I remember I was listening to Leno's monologue years ago, and he talked about this guy who had set his whole house on fire. There was a spider web that his wife wanted him to get rid of in the kitchen, and he took this torch and tried to torch the spider web and set fire to the whole house. So you might have some financial metaphor for that. Are you using the wrong financial tool to get a simple job done? So collect them. And then when you tell stories, stories should make a point, right? And so you can take the same story and have different points in different presentations. Okay, so let me just say that a story is different than a bio. So a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So as you're looking at the story that you're telling, ask yourself, is this really a story or is it a CV? And if it's not a story, dig further until you find one. So when I help people create custom versions of the 9 Money Mistakes book, generally the foreword, I can dig out the signature story usually in a session. But the bio, converting this bio into something that looks like a story, that is really tough going. So just keep at it. You will get it. Next, each story makes a point. So if you're folding stories into your presentation, you don't want to just tell the story. You want to suggest something that people can learn from this story. And then remember, the most influential person in a doctor's life is another doctor. So not only do you want to make doctors the hero of your story, but how about if you coach doctors to tell your stories so that you can cultivate this culture of introduction? Like, let's say that you helped a doctor get a really, really dramatic win. You can say to your doctor client, do you remember, what it was like for you when we first met? You were like literally losing sleep over this. You were snapping at your wife and your kids because of your concerns. And now look at you. You have confidence that you will be able to move up retirement just like you did. Well, listen, there are other doctors out there who might be suffering in silence. They're exactly where you were when we first met. Would you be open to sharing your story with other doctors and then maybe actually talk through the words with this doctor and let the doctor know, here are some triggers for telling your stories. Now, this can all be done in the spirit of service, right? This doesn't have to feel like self-promotion, but the reality is that there's a lot of financial pain out there, and that if this doctor told this story, that could mean that yet another doctor could find his or her way to a solid financial foundation. Next, you want to discover your doctor's stories, right? Every doctor has stories. What's their story about why they became a doctor? What's their story about what's important for money? Why is money important to them? And as you describe wealth, I invite you to frame it in terms of the freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Because most doctors, what they most want is they want to be in control, right? So dig down and really understand what it is that's important for doctors. Then, as you're working with doctors, and maybe you're talking about how to accelerate savings, you can remind them of the why. You can remind them why they're doing it, and that makes it easier to move forward. Okay, so again, a point that I've come to again and again is that the most influential person in a doctor's life is another doctor. So you definitely want to help doctors know your stories, become engaged with stories. You want to see how the doctor is the story. And then you want to show the doctor how you can change the doctor's story by facilitating this magical transformation. And remember, the sales cycle is nothing more than a series of conversation. And a story is just a special kind of conversation. So humanize your communication with stories. You know, a story is a great conversation starter. And then just a couple of quotes. The character of a man is known from his conversations. So the kinds of stories that you tell are going to influence the way that people perceive you. You always want to project optimism and hope. And keep in mind something that Maya Angelou says, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So think about this presentation that I started out with. You know, yes, they could have, you know, talked about the 5 things that wealthy doctors do. They could have talked about the power of compound interest. But the stories that they told really came from the heart. And clearly, these stories are going to be stories that these doctors are going to remember. I mean, just to give you one example, one of the partners here was a relatively young man. He was in his 30s. His wife just had their second child, and the child was born with some unexpected, life-threatening conditions. And he was just working to figure out what this condition was. But in his signature story, he really told the story of how doctors had made a difference in his life. And now he's feeling more and more committed to really helping doctors, sharing his gift. And his gift is growing money. It's been something that he's done for a long, long time. And, you know, this is why he's focusing on doctors. No doctor's ever going to forget that story. So I have some closing comments. I'm not quite done, but one of my gifts is really the ability to draw out people's signature story. And I wanted to just leave a couple of minutes in the event that somebody wanted to hop into the hot seat and see if I could help draw out the signature story. So if you would be interested in being unmuted, please feel welcome to just raise your hand or go into the question box and say, me, I'd be interested. All right. Well, I will leave that offer open. Um, and I just want to kind of go to the next level with stories and remind you that you tell stories to yourself also, right? And the stories that you tell yourself can impact your performance. And sometimes the stories you tell yourself aren't real helpful or hopeful stories. And especially today with so much trauma and struggle out there, I think it's particularly important that we try to be positive. And I read a book that really changed my life, and I would recommend that you pick it up. It's called A Complaint-Free World. And the subtitle is How to Stop Complaining and Start Enjoying the Life You always wanted. So, as you're looking at your world, there are some things that you can change, and there are some things that you cannot change. So, if you can't change it, this book recommends that you change your attitude. Don't complain. And in this book, they talk about what a complaint is. And then there's this 21-day challenge of being complaint free for 21 consecutive days. Sounds easy, right? Anything but. And reading this book really opened my eyes to the stories that I was telling myself. And it invited me into telling much more empowering and hopeful stories. Since the sales cycle is a series of conversation, I wanted to offer 5 different conversation starters. You can offer thanks. You can deliver a compliment. Now, this is actually kind of magical, because if you want to get to, let's say, a key physician opinion leader or a center of influence, you could potentially get on the phone by telling the gatekeeper, does this person just have a couple of minutes? I'd like to deliver a compliment. And, if you want to connect with a thought leader, this has to be an authentic compliment. Like, I read your article or blog post or watched your video, and I had just wanted to compliment you about the clarity. So you want to make it really specific. But I'll tell you, nobody's going to screen out a compliment, and you're going to connect with somebody in a really deep and profound way by delivering a compliment. Another great way of starting a conversation is one of my favorites. Imagine that you had a magic wand. What wish would you want to come true? Another great way of starting a conversation is to solicit feedback. Go to your existing doctor clients. Ask them, what was their experience like with you? What do they appreciate about what you do? On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is a completely delighted client, how would they rate you, and what can you do to earn a 10? The next thing that you can do is you can just have interesting questions that you can ask, and you can think about what some of these questions are ahead of time so that you always have something that you can ask. Actor Anna Devere Smith has 3 really great questions. Do you know the circumstances of your birth? Have you ever faced death? Have you ever been falsely accused? These are great conversation starters. But with the doctor, some of the questions that I posed before, what inspired you to become a doctor? What were some of your proudest moments as a doctor? What were some of your most difficult moments as a doctor? What do you know now that you wish you would have known way back when? So, speaking from the heart, making this human connection is a way to accelerate growth. You know, people want to work with people they know, like, and trust. The more authentic that you are willing to be, the better. And the more profound the connection. So you've got two options now. I invite you to take this content and think about how you are going to integrate stories into your selling process, or how you're going to deepen storytelling to really get better results. So hopefully you've gotten some helpful tips to make that happen. But as I mentioned, you know, one of my gifts is mining for these stories. So I'm just experimenting with a new service I'm calling a Get It Done laser coaching package. So it's the ability to basically purchase an hour of my time. And, you know, within an hour, I can mine a lot of stories and shape these stories. I'm making my time available. You can purchase an hour of my time on a limited basis. You know, I've only got a couple of these slots available. I can tell you that most people, you know, could not pay for an hour of my time. You know, I've gotten $5,000, $10,000 for an hour of my time. But because I want to make this available to you, you know, for a limited time, I'm just going to price a couple of slots at $497 to purchase my time. If you're interested, you are welcome to just drop me an email, drvicky@targetingdoctors.com, and just let me know that you'd like to learn more about that slot. So I am here to help you get better results. I'm really, really passionate about storytelling. I hope that you will take away a tip or two that you will implement today so that you too can get better results, engage more doctors, and inspire more doctors to take action. So thank you again. Oh, Ken, we have a taker for the hot seat. Ken, if you would like, I would be happy to unmute you, and we can see if we can come up with something. All right. So Ken, I have unmuted you. Hello. Oh, I might have to do something to hear you. Hang on.
Can you hear me now? No.
Hello, Ken. There you are. Hey there. Welcome.
Yeah. Can you hear me? No.
I can.
You can. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
great. I actually came up with, I had something I've been refining over ages, but earlier in this webinar, I came up with something 10% the way it was and 90% new.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right. So 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And the treatment, I'm okay now, knock wood. The treatment started with a week in the hospital being infused. And they let me go home, and I came back the next day, and I was feeling like crap. I don't think I've ever felt so badly in my life. And I was walking into the waiting room in the oncology floor, and a total stranger, I must have looked like crap, a total stranger, also probably an oncology patient, says, "It gets better." And I broke down, not because I was feeling so bad, but because I was feeling so grateful that this stranger had taken the time to just give me a little bit of a positive push. There was no way I could pay him back. There was no way I could pay the doctors back for giving me back my life, but I wanted to pay it forward, And so what I do is help doctors relieve some of the stress, some of all the things that go on in the office that make them wonder, is it going to get any better?
I love it, Ken. I love it. And so, of course, you can tell the story of how, doctors saved your life, and, maybe you want to work with oncologists or hem-onc, and just tell that story. But another pertinent thing right now is, remember, doctors have this acute financial pain. Like, if you've been to any of my webinars, I'm giving another one on Thursday to talk about doctors' financial realities. This is tough. I mean, I hosted a listen party from the American College of Surgeons, economic survival strategies for surgeons. So you have been through downturns before. You can reassure doctors it's gonna get better. And, so telling that story of what happened in the waiting room, you can tell any of your clients, especially doctor clients, it's gonna get better. And we're already seeing ourselves turn the corner. But I think that it's really, really helpful for doctors to get that message. It gets better. And you can say that, but if you put it in the context of this story, it pops, right?
Yeah.
All right, so great job. I love that. I just love that. Anyone else want to talk about stories or get in the hot seat? Larry, I see that your hand is raised, I think. I'm going to unmute Larry. Hello, Larry. You might be muted yourself. All righty, let me go to Michael Goodwin. Michael Goodwin, you are unmuted. All right, well, we seem to be having some technical challenges here. Michael or Larry, are you there? Can you unmute yourself from your end if you want to hop into the hot seat? Or anyone else who'd like to jump into the hot seat? All righty. Well, I am not seeing anyone, so I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your participation, and I hope that you've taken away some great ideas about how you can make it easier to engage and attract and serve more doctors with storytelling. Bye-bye for now.